This is going to be a fantastic class, as good as it gets. It is going to be so good.
Yes.
And the first announcement Trevor had me to tell you, if you're not signed up for this class and signed up for his, he told me to announce that you need to go to his. So I said, Trevor, man. So if you are signed up, don't feel bad at getting up and heading over to his class. We got two great options, so you'll benefit from either class. And then Miss Katie told me that Braden has all the answers tonight. So if I have any questions, to call on Braden.
Great.
All right, let's begin with a word of prayer. Lee, do you mind to lead us, please?
Let's pray. Our God, Father in heaven, indeed, Father, we thank you so much for this day you've given to us, and especially, Father, for this time we have tonight to open up your word, to study from it, Father, and to increase our knowledge and understanding of it. We indeed thank you for it so much, and pray, Father, that you continue to be with us. We strive to serve you. We're thankful for all those, such as the teachers we have, that help us have a better understanding of it, for the things that they prepared for us, such as Jeremy has. We'd ask, Father, that you give him a good recollection of the things that he's prepared for us, and pray, Father, that you'd help us to make any changes we need to make. We're thankful, Father, for Jesus, for what he's done for us as he redeemed us back to you. And we know what a gift that was and what a sacrifice it was on our behalf. And pray, Father, to be with those of our number here that are not able to be here. Pray that if they're not feeling well, Father, that you restore them to their health.
Yes.
If they're away from us, that you'd keep them safe and return them safely when their time comes.
Yes.
Pray most of all, Father, that you'd be with us as we stand before you in judgment, that you'd grant us a home with you in heaven. Ask, Father, you be with us until all time. We humbly ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Let's see. Okay, we are studying 1 Samuel. I am excited about the study, and so hopefully it goes well. I did not get far along in my studies I'd like. I don't have material for you. I'll be sending that out lesson by lesson. If I can get that done before the end of the quarter, then I'll try to send that on as well. But we'll play that by ear and see how it goes. Okay, so we did study this a little bit ago. Jim actually led us in some material from 1 Samuel, but he did a review of Judges, and he didn't get too far into Samuel, so I thought it'd be okay if I went ahead and plunged through here. So appreciate the work that he had done before, and we're going to look at 1 Samuel tonight. I typically like to have an introduction lesson, but we're not going to be able to do that. We have 12 lessons of material, and we have 12 lessons here. I think with the gospel meeting, we'll be missing a lesson in class. So we're going to have a 5-minute introduction, and we'll move along. This is also one of the most challenging books in my mind as far as trying to teach in a quarter. So Genesis, I did not attempt to teach in a quarter. I took 2 quarters for that. That's 25 chapters apiece. A book like Exodus has 40 chapters, but you got 25 through 30 and then 35 through 40. So you're looking at 10, 12 chapters of law, which I would compress into a single lesson. Same thing with what we did with Deuteronomy, compress the law portions. So this has 31 chapters of narrative, and there's not much law or places that I can compress. So we're going through 2, 3, 4 chapters a time, and it'll feel like we're scooting pretty good. So even tonight, I would love to take 2 or 3 weeks on this lesson, but it's not going to happen, right? So the structure really has 3 sections. And the first section's in the first 7 chapters that deals with Eli and Samuel. And then we have chapters 8 through 15 that deals with Samuel and Saul. And the third section is Saul and David. And this is going to head into 2 Samuel. Originally, 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel were a single book. And so that beginning of David's story, or his rise to power, goes through 2 Samuel 5, where he is anointed there. But that's what we have here. You may remember in Hebrew literature that there is a propensity for arranging things in a dual manner, or having two components to it. So we see this in poetry with parallelism. You'll have a line and then a parallel line with that you compare. We have that same concept in a chiasm. You have a chiasm here that kind of leads and then it regresses, right? Or you could put it like this in a narrative form, so that the story arc goes up, the rising action, then you have the pivotal moment, and then it goes down. We're going to see one of those tonight with Hannah. Another way that Hebrew literature really borrows this, I don't know what to call it, dual nature aspect, is through comparisons. And we're going to see that in these books as much as any other. In fact, what you'll notice here is that Eli and Samuel are placed side by side for comparison's sake. In fact, in each one of these sections, there's so much to say. In each one of these sections, we're dealing with leaders, right? All of these men are leaders. So in each section, you have a rising leader and a falling leader. The falling leader, if that's the right language, is the one that is losing their power. And then the rising leader is the one that's coming to power. So Eli, we'll see by the end that he is given a prophetic utterance that he is not to continue as priest. He has that falling power. But Samuel obviously is rising throughout the narrative. And he becomes a prophet and takes over as leader. He rises until he appoints his sons as judges. They're ungodly people. The people ask for a judge, or ask for a king, and they put in Saul there. And so Samuel is waning in power, and Saul is waxing or becoming king. And then we'll see this really play out with Saul and David. Saul, his kingdom is taken away in chapter 13 and again in chapter 15 as far as a prophecy. But that plays out for several more chapters. Spoiler alert, he dies in the last chapter of this book, 1 Samuel, but he's on the decline through most of this book. David, on the other hand, is rising. So what that's going to do is show not just this waxing and waning, this going down and coming up with the leaders, but you're going to place those side by side, and the troublesome qualities are going to appear even more troublesome when they're placed beside someone that has godly qualities, and vice versa. Those godly qualities are even shown to stand out even more when they are placed beside someone that has questionable ethics and practice. Okay, does that make sense? The other thing I'll say by way of introduction is that leadership has been a key thought in previous books. In fact, this is going to complete the period of the Judges. So there's a couple of books that this will continue from, and it has a lot of context and background. The first one is Judges, right? So we looked at those cycles of the Judges. We saw what kind of leader those judges were. I think ultimately we see that they are lacking in many ways. They also do display periods of faith, but in general, there is a decline in the quality of leadership with the judges. They are regional leaders raised up by God to fight the oppressive enemy, right? So that they could push them away and return to peace. But we also see some questionable practices among the judges. At the end of the book, we see how bad it has gotten for a community and a nation that has turned their back on God, so that they are engaged in gross immorality. We see the rape of a girl. We see that they are engaged in this thing called the law of Harem, which they are to commit the nations of Canaan to total destruction. Well, they do that to their own. So what happens by the end of Judges is that they look more like the Canaanites than the people of God. They have been so influenced there. So that provides a backdrop and a background for this book, because Samuel and Eli are the last of the two judges. So we'll see some comparisons there and some echoes back to the book of Judges. The book of Ruth is the other book that is foundational here. In fact, in the Hebrew Bible, you're going to go straight from Judges to Samuel. There is no book of Ruth there. That's placed in the writings in the back of the Hebrew Bible. In English, though, we place Judges, then Ruth. Now, Ruth takes place in the days of the Judges. That's what chapter 1, verse 1 says. Ruth, and then Judges. And so and part of the reason for that is what we find in chapter 4 of Ruth, where we see her genealogy. So in the midst of this wicked time period of the Judges, we find a godly couple, a godly man and a godly woman. They marry, and from that line comes David. So those two books provide a great backdrop for what we're going to look here. Any questions or comments? There's a lot more we could say. Let's jump into 1 Samuel, and let's read the first 8 verses. Can I get a reader, please? Yeah, Kyle.
There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph, and Ephrathite. He had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other, Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. For the 2 sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests of the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah his wife and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion, because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, but not because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah her husband said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? And why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? Okay, good.
This establishes the setting. What we do see in the first couple of chapters through chapter 2, verse 11 is a chiasm. I don't see Norm. He might be in the back. He likes chiasms. I do as well. But a chiasm is simply a structure that what is at the front is mirrored in the back. And so often we're looking down the line like this. It comes in and out. And I've started like flipping these upside or to the side to show more of the narrative aspect of this chiasm, okay? And so you'll notice that the elements there correspond together, okay, at this on each side of these. And the central element is often something that's emphasized. And so the central element of this narrative chiasm is the birth of Samuel. This half over here, this first half, the rising action that comes about with that is Hannah's, how do I say it, distress, right? Distress. What language is used to describe her distress here?
Wept, not eat. Her heart was sad. She wept bitterly in verse 10.
Okay, what verse?
Verse 10.
Okay, verse 10. Before we even get to verse 10, she's caused to do some of those things by who? Right, her rival wife, right? Peninnah. And so it uses the language, verse 6 and 7. Let's see. Her rival used to provoke her grievously, to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. Again, that repetition comes in the Hebrew language. It piles on the description when it wants to make that point. And so we see that she has been provoked here by her rival wife. I'm sure she knew how to press her buttons. She had many children, right? But there also seems to be the case that, at least in the English text, that her husband there, Elkanah, loved her and possibly loved her more. Okay? We see it says that he loves her more when he gives her that double portion. Okay? In the Septuagint, it makes it a little less clear. It says that says that he only gave her one portion because the Lord closed her womb. And so there's some maybe ambivalence there. If we look at the characterizations here, we see two individuals that really misunderstand Hannah. So the first one's obviously the rival wife. She brings as much oppression as she possibly can. She's irritating. She's probably hurt herself. Hurt people, and we see that's what she's doing. But the second one is her husband, Elkanah. When I read through this, what it reminded me of, you know the passage in 1 Peter 3, it says, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. That's the opposite of what's happening here, right? He does not seem to understand her sorrow at all and says, well, aren't I good enough for you? You know, we have very little to go on. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but he seems to miss the point. And so she is even more distressed. Peninnah and then Elkanah. Terry?
Abraham understood because until Ishmael, he didn't have a child. Isaac, what did Isaac do? He prayed after 20 years. He prayed for his wife. Versus Elkanah has children through his other wife. So it's not as grievous to him, perhaps.
Yeah. So that Terry mentioned the fact that Elkanah's perspective may differ from Abraham, and that Elkanah has some children through his other wife. Okay, good. Any other questions or comments? So Hannah goes to the temple and she prays and she makes a vow. In fact, it says in verse 10 that she was deeply distressed. The Hebrew uses the language that she was bitter of spirit. The word there, I don't expect you to know a lot of Hebrew, but maybe you recognize this word, Mara. Does anybody recognize the word Mara in Hebrew? Where does that come from? Yeah, you'll remember that Naomi says, and Naomi's name means my delight. She says, don't call me my delight anymore. Call me Mara. Call me bitterness, right? That's the same language that she uses here. Seems intentional to me. We're going to see a lot of echoes back, picking up Judges and then even to Ruth. So that's a possible echo back to this bitterness of the account or story of Ruth here. She says that my soul is very distressed. Then she vows a vow to the Lord. What does she vow?
Her son.
She vows her son. She doesn't have a son, but she asks for the Lord to have a son. She says, if you give me a son, then I will do something. Typically, a vow says, if you'll give me what I really want, then I'll do this other thing over here for you. Or if you'll give me what I want, I'll be devoted in my service in some way to you. Is that what she does? It's pretty unusual. She says, if you give me a son, I'm going to give the son right back to you all of his days. And that's exactly what she ends up doing. She vows and makes this promise that she will give this one to the Lord. And not only that, but she also says something else about this son. What does she say? No razor, okay, that seems like an odd part of the vow. Is that so odd? Have we seen anything like that before? What's that?
Samson.
Yeah, well, Samson, right? And the reason it was said of Samson, what was the broader context that Samson was a what? A Nazarite, right? So that goes back into the law. A Nazarite would be someone that would be dedicated, and so they would have to refrain from certain things like like drinking wine and cutting their hair, actually eating anything of the fruit there of the vine. And so we see some extra restrictions on a Nazirite, someone that was dedicated. And so she doesn't spell all of that out, but it may have some of those implications there, okay? So she vows to give that to the Lord. Again, verse 10, she was deeply distressed and prayed, and she wept bitterly. We see Hannah as someone that is persecuted. She is low of heart. The first two characters we see, I don't think act too favorably toward her. They misunderstand / mistreat her. And so she's distraught, right? Someone else comes on the scene, and he also is going to misunderstand her. You can see the aloneness, just the feeling of sorrow that she would have. So who else comes on the scene, sees her praying? Yeah, Eli sees her praying, and she doesn't look to be acting quite right. In fact, he assumes that she is drunk with wine because she's moving her mouth. She's probably pretty emotional. My guess is that maybe her body would show the emotions of her sorrow. And so he says, this woman looks drunk. And he approaches her and says, put away your wine. Now, how does she respond to that? Yeah, I'm not drunk. I've not had any alcohol. I've not had any wine or strong drink. That's not the case. That's not the issue, but rather I am afflicted in my soul, and I am praying to the Lord, okay? So we see this prayer of misery that it goes up, and then we see this sad conversation that she has with Eli as she has to explain herself. And one of the first things that she says, now if I was drunk in the temple, that would clearly be a bad thing, right? That would be disregarding God, and that would be something that's completely inappropriate. And so she starts off with the phrase, I am not a worthless woman. English translations sometimes say that. The word there is a daughter of Belial. You might have heard that reference to Belial. We'll see that in other places in Scripture. You even see that translated in the New Testament. For example, 2 Corinthians chapter 6. And so there's a lot of different references to that. Belial has some background with it, but for our purposes, we can see worthless involved there. I am not a daughter of Belial. I'm not a worthless woman, she says. Okay. Oh, let's see. Where does that take us through? Troubled in spirit. How does Eli then respond to her? He's misunderstood, but she straightens things out. How does he respond?
Go in peace.
Yeah, he says to go in peace. And the God of Israel grant your petition. And so she had not been eating, as Terry mentioned. She had not been drinking. She was so sorrowful that she didn't want to take any food. And here it says, after Eli says that, she said, let your servant find favor in your eyes. The word favor is very closely related to her name here. Hannah's name means grace or favor. She says, let your servant find favor in your eyes. It says she went away, and her face was no longer sad. And she also is going to be taking food. I think that's somewhere in there. Yeah, she ate.
And ate.
What verse is that, Miss Betty?
18.
That's 18. Okay, any questions or comments there? Yes, Terry?
I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry.
Okay. It's interesting that she says the exact thing that the angel says for the Nazirite vow to Samson's mother.
Mm-hmm.
Do not drink wine or strong drink. The exact same thing. It might mean a faith that God's going to answer her prayer, that she will not drink those things. She's not doing it, and she won't drink it. I just kind of find that interesting.
Yeah, so Terry brings up a correspondence with Samson's mother. She's unnamed, but she says that she's not going to, or she's commanded not to take strong drink or to take wine at all. And so that reference is made here, which may echo back to Samson. Okay? Good. In a second, I'm going to completely agree with you. I'm holding back. Brother Tant?
There in verse 18 where it said her face was no longer sad. And I've got a note in my margin there, the Philippians 4, 6 and 7. Well, 6 and 7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all comprehension, will guard your hearts and your thoughts. So that's a fulfillment of what's happened here, is she made a petition, and now she is calm in spirit.
Okay, good. And so Brother Tant brings up Philippians 4, 6, and 7 about the relationship between prayer and peace and peace of soul. Okay, good. Any other questions, comments? So with that, she journeys home. She journeys to Ramah, and then we do find the birth of Samuel recorded in verses 19 through 23. It says she rose early in the morning. They go on their journey back. So these central elements here, Eli's blessing, and then the Lord remembers Hannah. She's prayed, the Lord remembers her. I don't know if Norm, I'm sure he showed you, I'm not sure I was in every class, but in the ark, not the ark, but the flood narrative, there is a pretty big chiasm there. And it makes sense. You got that rising action, right? The flood waters rise. And so you get to this point of tension. Chapter 8 and verse 1 is the central element of that chiasm, right? Anybody remember what chapter 8 and verse 1 says?
God remembered Noah.
The Lord remembered Noah, right? That's the central point. The difference between destruction and the flood and salvation is God's providence, God's providing, God's remembering. You may remember in her prayer, she says, listen to me, take note of me, and remember me. Okay? This is what's happening. The central element of this story, every time you see a barren woman in Scripture, it's there to show God's glory. He provides, right? Every time a woman is mentioned to be barren, God provides a child. And so that happens here as well. And so we find this blessing from Eli. May the Lord grant you, and then the Lord remembers Hannah. So it's very significant. Yes, Jason?
Any thoughts about why Hannah prayed for so long and received a negative answer, and then all of a sudden Eli prays and God remembers her?
So the question is, any idea about the timing of this, why Hannah prayed for so long, and then Eli prays and it happens? I don't have a great answer other than in his time. God uses this in his time to bring about his purposes. And so maybe she needed to feel that distress to fully understand the glory. I can come up with several what ifs, but those are some of my thoughts. Jason, you have any other thoughts?
Wowza.
Yeah. Okay, good. What's that, Justin?
I'm sorry.
No.
Does it say that she prayed every year or just this year in particular?
Well, it says it like this. They used to go up year after year. The things seem to happen with the double portion and the being left out. Seem to happen year after year. We're told of a single episode. There could be some implications of a year after year part of that, but we're not exactly told.
My thought about that was that if Elkanah had two wives, assuming they became wise within a relative amount of time, and she has many children and Hannah does not, that she had been praying for quite some time as they were going up and coming back to worship. So.
Yeah, good thought. Yes, Chance, and then Jim.
Just a question about the way these phrases are used. Have you found, or do you have anything to say about, so something Jason said made me think to look a little closer at that passage, and I don't necessarily see that it's explicitly stated that Eli prayed. Rather, he pronounces this blessing upon her. So is that always an indication that there was a prayer that was made, a petition that was made by Eli? Or is it possible that it was then just revealed to Eli that her petition was being granted? So it's not as if her prayer was never heard and that it took Eli to pray. And I don't think this is what Jason was saying. I guess I'm curious about when a prophet is making a statement like that, is it always an indication that there was a prayer offered by that prophet?
Yeah, so the question is, did Eli pray? It says that he blessed her. Did he pray? I don't know how to answer that exactly, except there's probably some gray area. I think the idea typically with a blessing was seeing something from God. May the Lord bless you. In fact, you'll hear Jews today, they'll have a blessing over everything. May the Lord bless, and it goes on. So there's an inherent understanding of God's involvement in that. So how we parse a blessing from a prayer, I think there's some closeness, maybe not technically a prayer, but maybe not far off. I don't know that he mentions, may the Lord bless you. I have to look.
The God of Israel.
Okay, he does say the God of Israel. So those are my thoughts. I don't know. Anything you'd like to add, Chance? Or?
No, I think it's like you said, it's hard to know exactly what's going on there, and I think it's a good question that Jason raises. It's just, to me, it's more a statement of one of the, I guess, ideas you proposed, which is that it's in God's time, and the fact that we have this interaction between Hannah and Eli, a prophet of God, who, speaks with God and has interactions with God, to me is more commentary on that this is being done in God's time more than it would necessarily be that it took Eli to sort of facilitate.
Yeah, so one thing I'll add to that, I know everybody couldn't hear, I don't know that I can repeat all that comment, but you mentioned Eli as a prophet. So it mentions that he judges, and he seems to have a priestly function. Samuel is going to be wearing an ephod, which is a priestly function, but later it's going to say that he is a prophet. So I know we haven't got there yet, but maybe some of those mesh, but you add to that the fact, chapter 3, verse 1 says the word of the Lord was rare in those days. So Eli is a little bit sympathetic on both parts. He has some spiritual blindness on his part, but he also has some positive things here. He's kind of a character in limbo with a few things. Jim, did you have a comment?
Yes, I'm adding a what if, but I think that it goes along with what you say about in God's time, when you go up 40,000 feet, this is all, the Old Testament pointing to Jesus, right? And Samuel is so pivotal in the life of David, who is so pivotal as the forerunner of the Messiah. Again, I don't know, but it sure seems that way. And it just wasn't maybe time in his time for him to come yet. And so this was the time. And to match up the intersection and people interacting and all that, you can see how that would work out.
Okay, good. So Jim echoes the thought that the timing of the Lord may have played a part and likely played a part in his answering of the prayer. Yes?
I think it's interesting, the two women. You have one woman who has plenty of children, but can't be happy with it because her husband doesn't love her. At least that's what this text suggests. And you have another woman who can have children, but her husband loves her, and she responds to it completely differently than the other woman. She prays, she's patient, so her character is clear. And I think she kind of goes to the garden when she goes to the temple. I don't think Eli promises her a child. I sense that she's kind of gone through it, and now she's going to trust to see what will happen. I don't know. I don't know if you saw in your studies that Eli doesn't just say you will be pregnant.
Right.
And so you see the character of women who are responsible for raising great men in the Bible. Mary's character, Hannah here, and in other places. It's a contrast between how people respond to their circumstances.
Yeah, tell me your name again.
Todd.
Todd. Okay, I'm going to try to get that. Thank you, Todd. That is helpful. You bring up some points about really in this marriage where we have polygamy, right? We have kind of this favored. We've seen this before, right? We see this in Genesis with Isaac and with Jacob, and especially with Jacob there, you find that they're exchanging mandrakes, which would have some kind of sexual connotation for the time. So they both have what the other one wants, and often will make the point, probably rightly so, that there is a problem with polygamy. When you're committing yourself, there's some mixed commitments there. So that is helpful. I think we are reminded of that. As far as Hannah, it is hard to know. Something changes her attitude. And so she's been praying in distress. Seems to me she takes comfort in some way from what Eli says to her. He doesn't promise her a child, that's true. Yeah, Jason?
I know we need
Yeah, all right. Listen, yeah, if we don't make it through, not my fault, right?
I just want to make a comment about what you said about the Lord's time. If she has been praying a long time, it helps to remind us that we very, very rarely can see the outcome of something. And it's magnified when it's dear, close to our heart. Yeah. And so it is just an amazing act of faith and trust in God that He sees what's going on, He knows what's going on, He is working on your behalf. So just keep praying and trusting until you get some kind of definitive answer, if you ever do.
Okay, good. So Jason points out the need for praying and trusting God, even when prayers don't seem to be answered the way we want. It may be a timing issue, and so there's a need for trust there. Excellent point. And I am just kidding. I want comments. I want you to be engaged, and if we don't make it through the material, I think when I started teaching, my sole goal was to make it through all the material, right? So if we don't make it through the material, you just have a little extra homework, but it will be okay, right? Jennifer?
I do think that, especially since she's a woman, it is important to see that she feels like God heard her. The name of Samuel, she says, because I have asked for him from the Lord. And then in verse 27, she says, for this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition. I don't think she felt like she had to go through a prophet. Maybe something about what he said did give her some comfort, but I think it's really clear then in her prayer too that she feels like God heard her.
Sure. Yeah, so Jennifer points out the fact in talking about the name here that she really feels like God has heard her. I think it's important you line up these other three individuals, right? She's persecuted and oppressed by her rival wife. She's misunderstood by her husband. She's misunderstood by Eli, who seems to have some spiritual blindness in spots. But God hears her, right? And that'll preach as well, right? The world against us, God is there for us, and we can go to Him in prayer. Jennifer also brought up the point that the name Samuel means God hears. God hears. That's significant. You think about the Egyptians or the Israelites in Egypt. You know, chapter 1 and 2, you find this oppression that builds and builds and builds. It uses some of that intensifying language. Finally, in chapter 2, verse 24, it says their cries go out and God hears their cry. Very significant for that passage. It's very significant here as well, right? God hears. Saul's name means something along the lines of asked, right? And the people are going to ask for that. But you'll notice here that she says, I have asked for him from the Lord. I don't know if that's a little bit of a dig at Saul later, who was requested, but not necessarily from the Lord. People just want a king, right? That's a little bit of preview. Okay, questions or comments on chapter 1? Okay, so she does come back. She says, Eli, it's me, right? She pauses for a bit to make sure that the child has been weaned. Then she comes to Eli. She says, it's me, I'm here. Her attitude is one of praise to God. I can only imagine how difficult it would be to get this child that you love and then to give it back to the Lord. That may turn some people to bitterness, right? Her spirit was bitter when she was praying to God because of the affliction she went. But when she comes to the Lord, she comes before him with praise and thanksgiving. She's not bitter in any way. And we see that in this wonderful prayer in chapter 2. And we didn't even get to Eli, and you're going to have to read chapter 2 on your own. But this prayer, that was my first slide. I'll tell you what. Samson and Samuel, I told you I'd agree with you a second. You can go through all of this. Now, Samson is significant. He provides a bookend, I think, for this account. There's some question about who all had a role in writing some of this history. This shows some coherence across books. You find Samuel here booked in by Samson. A lot of the same things happen. In fact, the stories that begin with the exact same wording. There was a certain man, right? That certain man had a barren wife. The barren wife has a child ultimately when an angel tells her she prays. They're both Nazarites. You can keep going through here. Samuel will begin to save Israel from the Philistines, Samson. Samuel will, through his judgeship, will continue, if not complete, at least in part, that process, right? So these are bookends around the Philistines, okay? They're both judges, Samson and Samuel. Samuel is going to operate a little bit differently than your typical judge. So Terry, I agree with you. There's more points to be found than even here, right? So this prayer is an amazing prayer. She begins in verse 1 by saying, my heart exalts in the Lord, my horn is exalted in the Lord, my mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. Verse 1, or the first verse, is that 1? Yeah, verse 1 is very personal, and that's what we would expect. What we don't expect is that she leaves the personal pronouns from that point on. She moves in verse 2 to talk about our God. She moves from personal to collective, and then she starts stating things in general about who God is. God is sovereign, and you see the central section of this in verses 6 and 7. The Lord kills and the Lord brings to life. As she's had this baby, she understands that this owes itself to God. God has provided. You see at the end of verse 7 that the Lord brings low and he exalts. That's the theme of this entire prayer. The Lord will bring low the mighty, the arrogant, right? He will humble them and he will exalt those that are lowly. This prayer becomes more than just a personal prayer for Hannah. We see it begins that way, it goes out beyond, but then it establishes this theme that we're going to find throughout Samuel and throughout the Bible. In fact, this prayer is a prototype for Mary's Magnificat when she praises God for what he accomplishes in Jesus, okay? So a lot of the same themes, same elements, if you place those prayers side by side, you'll see a lot of those important elements. I can't do it justice, all right? Any questions or comments? So I guess this will be the last thing I say. Hannah says, I am not a daughter of Belial. I'm not a worthless woman. But if you read about Eli's sons, they are worthless, right? That's the opening description. They are worthless, And they are worthless because of the way they treat the priesthood, the way they treat the service to the Lord. It is a means for selfish gain, not for serving God. They take what they want, and it says they treat the Lord with contempt in his sacrifices. I preached on contempt not too long ago, and I think we see that attitude and how dangerous it is. Terry?
I found it very interesting that Phineas, and the best I could tell, it's probably their great-great-great-great-grandfather. This Phineas is laying with the women at the tent of meeting and works there. But their great-great-great-great-grandfather went into the tent of meeting and stopped the slaughter after 24,000 that God killed that day because a man would dare take a woman and lay with her in the tent of meeting. He's named after her, but he's not even listed later. That it ended right there because of him.
Okay, good. So Terry brings up the idea of Phineas as an ancestor here, and she contrasts them. I said it was going to be the last thing I'll say, but because of this wickedness, their sin, remember, they're contrasting constantly with Samuel. In fact, you go back and forth. Samuel, Eli's son. Samuel, Eli's sons. Eli is going to have the priesthood stripped from him, and that's going to be seen in the future. Okay, and that will be the last thing I say. Thank you for your questions and comments.